Welcome back to All the Answers to Question Period with your host, David Krayden. Thanks for joining me again today. And you might be wondering, why aren't you downtown covering the Freedom Convoy trial? And I'll tell you, it's been put on hold until March. I couldn't believe this. Because, yes, I've been covering it quite faithfully, and it takes a lot of commitment to be there. It takes a lot of effort sometimes to get out and do it and to be there in person when there's other things to do. But I talked to Tamara Leach yesterday, and of course, she's one of the Freedom Convoy. I hesitate to say organizer. Personality is what I'm saying. Personalities who's been charged basically with nothing but mischief and counts on the mischief. She told me yesterday that things are going to be put on hold until March when the defense will do its final summation, and there might not be a verdict until the summer. So anyway, that's why I'm not there. So I'll be interviewing Tamara tomorrow to talk about this. And I'm just amazed at how they can possibly keep this thing going. Because I remember going there on the first day of the trial. It was just after Labor Day. It was the Tuesday after Labor Day. And it was still summer. Beautiful day. Here we are approaching winter. About what? 10 days away, 9 days away. And this thing has been put on hold again. I'm outraged over this. And anyway, I don't know how much Tamara can talk about how she feels about this, but she's just giving me the facts that she doesn't expect things to be resolved until the summer. And so that's why I'm not there today. So we're covering question period again. I just had some really good news. The very overbearing, delusional, and hypocritical president and CEO of CBC, Catherine Tate, has been asked, more like demanded, has been told she will appear before the Heritage Committee to talk about how it's possible to cut 600 jobs at the same time as you're still promising your executives are going to get Christmas bonuses. $16 million in bonuses. And of course, Tate says, well, we can't rule that out. No, which means, yeah, it's going to happen because people like her, this absolute wastage of people we have in high positions of power in this country, the hierarchy of so many crown corporations who are political appointees who are raking in money for doing nothing. Yeah, she wants to keep these bonuses going. You bet she does. And if she's not saying no, that means yes. So anyway, I'm writing a column right now about the CBC hypocrisy. And as I was writing it, I saw the word that Tate has been asked to appear before the Heritage Committee. Finally. Let's see if she can squirm out of that one. Now I see the speaker is back today from his important diplomatic jaunt to Washington, D.C., where he again showed how partisan he is by flopping his gums about how much he enjoyed being the leader of the young liberals and how Klaus Schwab, and this was like, I think 29 years ago, he was in contact with Klaus Schwab 29 years ago, and Schwab told him, you're going to win. Yeah. And it's so nice when you're ensconced with the elites of the world at that age. And this clown who thinks he's the Speaker of the House, who should resign now, has been with the global elites his entire career, as that quotation demonstrates. We got that little snippet, that little piece of video from Andrew Scheer, who posted it on his X site, formerly known as Twitter, yes. He didn't say where he got it, but somebody in that audience where Greg Fergus was exercising his diplomatic duties didn't like it and wanted people to know how partisan this speaker is. He's up to it again. And this is after, of course, he releases a video in support of the interim Liberal leader of Ontario, John Fraser. How nice for this guy. And he says, "Oh, it was a mistake. I thought it was just going to be shown at a bachelor party." Well, actually, he thought it was going to be shown at a private event. It wasn't going to be at the convention. And yet here he is standing around his office in his speaker's robes, lauding the services and how much fun we had electing Liberal Premier Dalton McGuinty. But I didn't expect that to be shown at the convention. It was just a mistake. So after he apologized, or actually didn't apologize for that disaster, he goes down to Washington, D.C. and does it again. Shows you how much of a partisan speaker he is. This is a disaster. The last speaker invited a Nazi Waffen SS veteran to come to the House of Commons, someone from his writing, approved by Justin Trudeau and the House Leader and the Liberal government House Leader. Yes, they approved it and they loved it. They met with him beforehand, but former Speaker Anthony Rota had to fall on his sword over that. No, I'm just making sure we're not missing anything here. But so Anthony Rota resigns and they elect this guy as Speaker. He's already got a conflict of interest problem. He's been cited by the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner last February because he's got a problem. He actively tried to intervene in a CRTC decision for a television station that wanted to be part of the carriage trade, if you will, part of basic cable. So he actively intervenes in that. He still gets elected as Speaker, and what the hell are the Conservatives thinking? Obviously, there,
The only group
we're
to
on
benefit
here.
from the Conservative plan to end the climate program, to end the rebate, of the top 20% of earners, who almost everyone else gets poorer for their plan. The Conservatives are fighting for the rich. They are not
How
fighting for
desperate
Canadians
are
who are
these
concerned about
liberals to suggest
affordability, the
you're
carbon prices,
poorer
both
without
the
a
climate
carbon
measure
tax?
and
Any
an
idiot
affordability
can
measure.
tell you doesn't compute.
From
Except
Thornhill.
this is a bigger
But
idiot.
I'll take that as a no. Not only are they not going to vote against our motion, but they're going to also quadruple the carbon tax on gas, groceries, and home heating. Instead of voting to take the tax off of farmers, this desperate prime minister spent his weekend calling Liberal senators to manipulate a vote that he already lost in this House. Senators gutted the bill, betraying farmers, and then his caucus lost their minds over a plan to make them work overtime unless they axe the carbon tax. So why won't they keep their hands out of everyone else's pockets and finally axe the tax so Canadians can put food on the table?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, there's only one caucus in this parliament that's losing their mind, and it's the Conservatives, because their Conservative senators didn't show up to vote on Bill C-34 in the other place. Mr. Speaker, we are happy to be here as long as it takes, because we will always stand up for Canadians, and we will always stand against what these things. We will.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, that's the exact opposite of what she said yesterday. Because of ministers like this, more Canadians will eat in food banks than ever, and more simply will go without any food at all. And for the new year, everyone is going to spend $700 more on groceries. While these Liberals fight for a few extra days of Christmas vacation, we're going to fight for Canadians, and then we'll send the Prime Minister on the permanent vacation that Canadians desperately want him to take. Why won't they axe the tax for families, for farmers, for First Nations, for good?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources and Energy.
Mr. Speaker, 98% of farm fuel emissions are already unimpacted by the price on pollution. Farmers, though, are on the front lines of climate change. They understand the critical importance of addressing the climate issue. There are many factors that are contributing to the rise of food prices in Canada and around the world, including the war in Ukraine. While the Conservatives continue to vote against Ukraine and oppose the free trade agreement they need in their fight against Russia, we are taking action to reduce and ensure affordability for Canadians and support the government of Ukraine.
You know, they might as well be talking about the Second World War, because the war in Ukraine is over. How stupid are these liberals? And how stupid do they think you are?
will see its bill rise by $700 in 2024. The price of meat, fresh vegetables, and bakery products will rise by almost 7% next year. And
Now,
the
this
costly
is
Liberal Bloc
reality.
coalition continues to drastically increase inflationary taxes that drive up the price of everything. It costs a lot to vote Bloc. Will the Prime Minister cancel his plan to drastically increase the carbon tax on farmers and families so that people can eat?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
Every day that I come in this house
Janice
and I
Suggs,
take my
there's-
seat,
I'll
I'm
have a
humbled,
scotch and soda.
as I know all of my colleagues on this side of the house are, to work on behalf of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, when we talk about the need to support Canadians, just yesterday, every Conservative on that side of the house voted against a national school food policy, a policy that would put food back into children so they're not at school hungry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to do everything to support Canadian families.
I accept you doing nothing because you're overspending.
Well, you know what's true? After 8 years of this Liberal government,
Give it
children
to
are
them, Luke.
asking for gift cards to be able to eat at Christmas, Mr. Speaker. It's unacceptable. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, the cost of housing has doubled. Interest rates are at record highs.
Yeah.
Grocery prices have risen 23%. And these prices will continue to rise next year for groceries. Mr. Speaker, will the Liberals do the right thing for once and vote to cancel?
Okay, can you tell me one thing? If the price of housing is doubling, if the price of groceries is doubling, how can the annual inflation rate be 3.1%? How?
All Canadians and all Quebecers know that the Conservatives do not support the less well-off. Our government supports all
What a
Canadians.
hypocrite.
Our government supports the least well-off. This month, UNICEF published data according to which poverty levels in Canada decreased to 22%. The Conservatives only know how to slash, cut, but we're here for all Canadians,
Actually, that sounds like the
especially those who need
CBC.
help the most. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Quebecers take in
Slash,
48% of
cut,
all asylum seekers in
Sounds like
Canada,
the CBC.
and that costs us $460.
We actually have Freeland in the House today. Incredible.
And yet, not only is the Minister of Immigration refusing to reimburse Quebec, but on Tuesday,
Yeah. It's always about reimbursing Quebec. Anyway, I encourage you to. We've got a very low amount of people watching today. I don't know why, but please invite your family and friends to watch this daily celebration of free speech. That's the only way I can describe this, because what's going on in the House of Commons is the last gasp of free speech in this country, in Parliament. You might not get any answers, but at least you're allowed to ask the questions. We're still there. It's going to come to a point very soon where we're not going to be allowed to ask the questions. And this is why we have to watch this farce of a procedure, because it at least allows us to ask the questions. And I've been telling people this for months, because why do you bother watching Question Period? It's because if we don't watch it, it's going to disappear, just like every other bastion of free speech in this country. We have to resolve to resist. We have to fight for the right to speak our minds. And we're losing that every day in Canada. Anyway, I'll put them back on here.
saying too much thanks to the federal government, which is asleep at the switch. So we don't need to take any lessons. Tomorrow, will the minister reimburse Quebecers? The Honourable Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois feels that $700 million a year and a lot more in social and health transfers doesn't count for anything. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
7 million Canadians are expected
are
struggling now because they have
jug
to use
meat
food
today.
banks. The price of food is going to go up by $700 next year just to put food on the table. In committee this morning, Walmart CEO said he's not supporting a stronger competition bureau. Maybe that's why the leader of the opposition did everything he could to block the legislation. Galen Weston, as we all know, earns 431 times what his average employee makes, and thinks his $12 million bonus was reasonable. What is the Prime Minister going to do to bring down grocery prices and end the free ride for these CEOs.
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. C-56 will help us further strengthen the Competition Bureau and to prioritize the interests of consumers. I hope that our colleagues will support us on this bill because it's an important one. It will help us to harmonize prices and to bring about lower prices. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
7 millions de Canadiens.
7 million Canadians, including more and more workers, are visiting food banks because they cannot pay for groceries. Today, we have learned that groceries will rise by $700 in 2024. Gail Weston, though, he said in committee that his $12 million bonus was very reasonable. What will the Prime Minister do to bring down prices and make these CEOs contribute? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are keeping an eye on the measures taken by grocery prices, including harmonizing prices, price freezes, and
what does that mean? Harmonizing
sales.
Prices. What does that mean?
We
How
are
do you
also
harmonize
looking
prices?
into long-term measures to bring down grocery
These
costs.
people are airheads.
C-56 will allow the Competition Bureau to hold big grocers to account and to
Well, that's
ensure
wage
that they
and price
prioritize
controls.
the best interest of consumers. And we will follow
This
up
one,
with
this
CEOs.
this MP is an
Canadians are learning the hard
airhead.
way that the Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost. And the latest food price report shows that Canadians are bracing for another devastating blow next year, with families being forced to pay over $700 more for groceries. And that's on top of all the price increases the Prime Minister's carbon tax and inflationary deficits have already caused. Instead of making food more expensive with planned tax hikes, why don't the Liberals support our common sense plan to take the carbon tax off of families, First Nations, and farmers?
Andrew Scheer was a great speaker. Unlike this, wastage.
The Honourable Minister for Families.
How dare you? You should have a bag over your head for what you've done recently. We've got to get rid of the speaker. He's an atrocity.
Order.
Order.
The Honourable Minister for Families.
We don't take you seriously, Speaker of the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, well, the Conservatives continue to do all that they can to paralyze government. We are here to work on behalf of Canadians and happy to do so, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to make the necessary investments in our social programs, in Canada Child Benefit, in our $10 a day National Early Learning and Child Care Program. These programs are transformational for Canadian families, saving them hundreds of dollars each and every month. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to work hard on behalf of Canadian families.
The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
The transformation that this government has caused to families is that working people now have to go to food banks after 8 years of this Prime Minister. Let me read you a quote from that food price report. Canadians are reducing their expenditures on groceries, either by reducing the quantity or quality of food they are buying. This is unbelievable. This is in Canada. We used to have a high quality of life, especially for working people. And now those people with jobs are having to put water in their milk or literally go hungry. Do the Liberals not realize what they've done to this country? And when will they finally take the tax off so food prices can come down?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the Conservatives when it comes to supporting the least vulnerable in Canada. Let's review the facts, Mr. Speaker. UNICEF came out with a report just this month where they showed that child poverty in Canada has decreased by 22% compared to where they left Canadians under our government. 2.3 million more Canadians have been lifted out of poverty under our government. They know how to cut.
Do you believe that? Do you believe that for a minute?
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
Farmers are protesting First Nations are taking this Liberal government to court, and families are literally choosing, should we eat or should we heat our homes? This is Canada after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, and now Canadians get to pay $700 more for food. Merry Christmas, brought to you by this Liberal government. Canadians would have preferred a lump of coal. Will the Prime Minister finally listen to Canadians and take the carbon tax off for farmers, families, and First Nations?
The Honourable Deputy
The
Prime Minister
Minister's not
and
even
Minister
there.
of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, Canada today has
We sure have missed
1.1
Christie, haven't
million
we?
jobs than before
Shaking her
COVID.
fist at you like that,
Jobs
hectoring,
recovery has
lecturing,
been 6 months
looking at you like you're an
faster than
imbecile.
after the 2008 recession when the Conservatives were in office. Canada's GDP is more than 104% higher than it was before COVID. The GDP recovery was 4 months faster than after the 2008 recession,
Amazing.
which was much more
That's
mild.
why we're
The
doing so
Conservatives
well.
don't know how to support the most vulnerable among us, and they don't know how to have an economic plan for job security. We do.
Who are the most vulnerable among us? I think
Mr.
most
Speaker,
people
the
listening
finance
today
minister wants to talk
would say
numbers. That's
they're
great.
the most
Let's
vulnerable
talk
among
about
us.
the 2 million Canadians that visited a food bank in one single month as a result of this NDP Liberal government. 800,000 Ontarians went to the food bank. It would be the third largest city in Ontario dependent on a food bank for food. This finance minister says she won't take lessons. Even a third grader could figure out they have destroyed Canadians and driving them to food banks. And they could fix it if they cared, Mr. Speaker. All they have to do, take the carbon tax off for families, First Nations, and farmers.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance for Canada.
Mr. Speaker, for once we heard something true from the Conservatives. Yes, the finance minister does believe in talking about numbers. So let's talk about some numbers. 1.1 million more jobs in Canada than before COVID. 8 out of 10 Canadians have more money in their pockets.
Terrible
thanks to the
reception
carbon
today.
price. And you know what? Last week I was in Edmonton. One of the largest investments in Canadian history, more than $11 billion from Dow. You know why? Because of our price on pollution. That's what the Dow CEO told us was underpinning of his investment.
The Honourable Member from l'Honorable Député de Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Well, with Christmas around the corner, it seems that it would have been common sense to give a little help to Canadian families. Our motion today calls on the government to leave more money in the pockets of Canadian workers. With the help of the Bloc Québécois, the Liberals want to drastically tax even more with their carbon tax. Will the Prime Minister cancel his plan to increase the carbon tax on the backs of our farmers and our Canadian families?
No, he won't.
The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd expect more from the 2023 Conservatives, but no, because in 2023 they have opposed workers' rights, they have opposed measures for housing, they're against climate change, they're reopening the abortion debate with C-311, and they're even betraying Ukraine, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, betraying Ukraine. Oh, no. Even though the war is over. Not a
Mr.
single
Speaker,
Liberal
he is
seems to know
turning his
that.
back on future generations by not fighting climate change. It's shameful, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier.
These people are so
I
full of
encourage
shit.
the
Amazing.
minister to step off of the Magdalen Islands and walk the streets of Montreal. Today is the Grande Guignolée des Médias food drive in Quebec. People who are on the streets asking for help because food banks are overflowing. Will this government finally understand? Order. Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier, from the beginning, please. Mr. Speaker, I was suggesting that the minister leave the Magdalen Islands and walk the streets of Montreal because today is the Grande Guignolée des Médias food drive in Quebec. People are on the streets asking for help because food banks are overflowing. Will this government finally understand people's desperation and listen to reason? A family of 4 will pay $700 more next year for groceries. So instead of wanting to tax even more with the help of the Bloc Québécois, can the government have a little heart and cancel the carbon tax, which isn't working, and that will finally help our farmers and families. The Honourable Fisheries and Oceans and Coast Guard Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely shameful to talk that way about people of the Magdalen Islands. That is absolutely shameful, Mr. Speaker. He should be ashamed to speak ill of those people from my region, Madam Speaker. Shame, he should be ashamed. Order. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. The member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier should take some vacation on the Magdalen Islands soon. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are human trafficking networks at Canada's borders, criminal networks run by Mexican cartels. These are bandits who exploit vulnerable people to smuggle them across borders, which have, by the way, become veritable civs. Just imagine, we heard from Radio Canada that the RCMP will be cutting its border staff. So on the one hand, the Minister of Public Safety is promising to increase the number of officers. On the other hand, the RCMP is potentially going to cut up to 25% of its staff. So imagine, you can't imagine a more ham-fisted decision. The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, we share the concerns of all Canadians when it comes to the integrity of our borders. My colleague says that we will reduce RCMP staff in Division C in Quebec. That's not true. We are fighting crime and securing our borders. Since the Roxham Road crossing was closed and since a third-party agreement, the RCMP reassigned its resources to prioritize fighting organized crime and to ensure the integrity of our borders. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. We have been waiting for 2 years for the Liberals' plan to cap emissions from the fossil fuel sector, but the wait is not over yet. The government has just announced a regulatory framework without regulations. It's guaranteed also that it won't be adopted before 2025. Worse still, the emissions cap will not come into force until 2030. And not only does this plan not require any reduction in oil production, the plan explicitly offers flexibility to oil companies to increase their production. It's literally a license to pollute until it's too late. Who wrote this plan?
Oh,
the oil companies?
I'm sick of these idiots.
The Honourable Natural.
Anyway, I just want to make a comment here because, you know what, Wilkinson is going to say the same thing about it. You're all getting more money in your pockets. Do you know what Guilbeault is doing every day? He's overseas at Dubai as Canada's chief representative at the COP28 climate change summit. He's announcing more incredibly stupid measures to make you starve, to make you freeze, to make you suffer. And that's what this is all about. Yeah, it's interesting, too. I've been looking at the numbers today. We are about 75, 85 below what we usually get. And that's because YouTube doesn't want you to know about these issues. They are, so please get on there, right? If you're on there right now, like the broadcast, subscribe if you haven't done so, share it if you haven't done that, ring the bell, because we really are facing censorship, not only from Trudeau, but from the very platforms we're using. They do not like us to talk about climate change. They do not like us to talk about the Made in Canada programs, the medical assistance and suicide euthanasia program. They like us not to talk about those things, and they censor us.
Yes, we're a world leader in fighting climate
You're
change,
a world
and we
leader
are
in
doing
being
so
authoritarian.
in a way that guarantees that we will have
All
a
you are is
strong,
another
prosperous economy in the
manifestation of
future.
communism.
The Honourable
Joseph
Member
Stalin.
from Hastings, Lennox, Nottington.
Canada's
Canada's food report for 2024 revealed that Canadian families will have to pay roughly $700 more next year for groceries.
Wow.
Basic food staples like meat, vegetables, and baking goods will all increase 5 to 7%. Canadians, Mr. Speaker, cannot afford this. Rents are rising faster than wages for the first time in 60 years. Mr. Speaker, will this Prime Minister, for once in his political life, listen to Canadians and axe the carbon tax for businesses, for farmers, for First Nations, and for families for good?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Employment and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, when the member opposite talks about basics, I'd like to point out the basic fact that just yesterday, every member in this House, including every Conservative member, had the opportunity to support Canadian families and children by voting to support a national school food program. And what did they do, Mr. Speaker? Every single one of them voted against it, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we will continue to support Canadian families.
The Honourable Member from Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Mr. Speaker, it's no wonder food bank usage and the need for food programs are exploding because this Prime Minister's taxes are directly making food prices more expensive.
That's right.
The rising cost of everything is not sustainable for Canadians. After 8 long years of this Prime Minister and its NDP enablers, families are forced to choose between paying rent and putting food on the table. Mr. Speaker, when will this tired, Liberal NDP government share some Christmas joy, axe the tax, and deliver some relief for Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we have solutions, not slogans. Solutions for fighting climate change and solutions for affordability. Mr.
What's
Speaker,
your solution?
I appreciate the question since it gives me the
What a
opportunity.
lot, you know, these
on this
people
side of
have
the
no
House to announce
inclination
on the
for
same week
truth.
as our government committed to a 75% reduction in methane emissions from oil and gas. As of today, we are the first oil and gas producing nation to put a cap on oil and gas emissions, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we have solutions. Solutions for climate change. Solutions for affordability. When will the Conservatives admit that the only facts that they've got are those of wealthy oil executives?
The Honourable Member from Dauphin Swan River.
After 8 years, Canadians can't afford to eat because of this Prime Minister's carbon tax. A new report shows that a family of 4 pays $700 more next year on groceries. The Prime Minister had a chance to lower grocery bills by removing the carbon tax on farmers. But once again, he proved he is not worth the cost. The Prime Minister spent the weekend working to gut Bill C-234 to keep the carbon tax on. Will the Prime Minister finally listen to Canadians and take the carbon tax off of farmers, First Nations, and families?
Now that question has been asked at least
Prime Minister
15
and Minister
times
of
today.
Finance.
Mr. Speaker, a UNICEF report released this month shows
Not this month.
that
So,
child poverty in Canada is down 22% under our
oh,
government.
what does that
But
mean?
you know who
What
is
does that
driving
mean?
up prices?
22%.
Vladimir Putin. He's driving up the price of fuel and of food. And you know what?
And the war
The
is
member
over.
opposite
Do you
has
know
the
that?
privilege of representing a
How
rural
stupid
Manitoba
are you? Do
constituency.
you know
It
the
was
war is over?
Ukrainian
No, you don't.
Canadians who settled
Or you're
Canada's
pretending you
prairies,
don't know
and
that.
we owe it to the people of Ukraine to support them today and not betray Ukraine as the Conservatives have done.
The Honourable Member from Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are patting themselves on the back for their botched emissions cap. After 2 years of delays, they've announced a watered-down oil and gas cap that won't even cut emissions enough to meet the Liberals'
Oh,
own
no.
target. Only the Conservatives'
It
old
won't
target.
even
The
cut.
same
Oh, you're
Conservatives
kidding.
who don't even believe this is a crisis. The Liberals are throwing
No, it's
young
not a
people's
crisis.
futures under the bus to make life easier for oil and gas companies. Will the minister get serious and fix
How
the emissions
stupid
cap?
are these people? I would say they're pretty
The
stupid.
Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and
Thank you
Energy.
very much for our allies in the NDP.
Canada became the first oil and gas producer in the world to put a cap on oil and gas emissions on a trajectory to reduce to net zero by 2050. It is important in our fight against climate change. It is important in ensuring the long-term competitiveness of the oil and gas sector as we decarbonize and ensure that the products that we are producing are ultra low carbon. I would say Pembina today said Canada is showing leadership by getting the economy ready for a net zero future. Clean Energy Canada said Canada should be commended for putting in place the world's first national oil and gas emissions cap by a major fossil fuel producing country.
Oh, shut
The
your
honourable
mouth for a
member
while.
from Timmins, James Bay.
The people of Attawapiskat continue to suffer a brutal housing crisis. Now there's serious questions about their water supply, and with winter hitting hard, a serious crisis is looming. We remember the winter of 2011 when Attawapiskat asked the Conservatives for help, and the Conservatives falsely blamed them for ripping off taxpayers and then expelled a democratically elected council. But under the Liberals, there's just been vague promises and no action. As this winter hits, will the government send a team to assess the situation on the ground and help find a solution for the people of Attawapiskat?
The honourable minister.
Well, your allies, they should.
Opposite for his unwavering advocacy for the people of Attawapiskat. I've met extensively with Chief and
See how
Council.
friendly
and
the
many,
Liberals
many
are with the
members of
NDP?
Attawapiskat. Indeed,
They're
the
just
department is
birds of a
working
feather.
closely with the community to make sure they have the tools they need, not just in the short term as winter bears down, but in the long term so the community can move forward with their identified priorities.
The honourable member from Etobicoke Centre.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of International Trade on the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. I've been speaking with Ukrainian Canadian Congress branches across Canada, and they've been telling me how important this agreement is, both to Canada's economy, to Ukraine's economy, and to Ukraine's rebuild. Now, it's been over a week since the Ukrainian Canadian Congress voted to the leader of the
The war is over in Ukraine. How stupid are these people?
Every single Conservative MP voted against the agreement and to urge them to support it. Still, Conservatives oppose
They just keep repeating the same script. It might as well be from 1955 because they are so stupid. They don't have any clue what's happening right now.
Mr. Speaker, Ukrainians have a word for the Conservative position on the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. Nitsa. Nonsense. It's nonsense to call this agreement woke. It's nonsense to not stand up for Ukraine's sovereignty. It is nonsense to suggest that this agreement puts a price on pollution on Ukraine because they've had a price on pollution since 2011. Absolutely. President Zelensky wants this agreement. The rest of this House voted for this agreement.
Who's Zelensky?
Why won't the Conservatives vote for this agreement?
He's gone.
The honourable member from Hidden Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, British Columbians are having a tough time making ends meet. Mortgages and rents are among the highest in the world. Gas prices, they're the highest in North America. Inflation on groceries have led to the longest lineups ever at food banks. As a former BC MLA, I've seen the light and hope that this NDP Liberal government will also show some common sense and axe the tax. Will the Prime Minister listen to Canadians and take the carbon tax off of farmers, First Nations, and families?
16 sounded
The
as
honourable minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
And no, the answer is we're not going to answer it.
Very interesting, given that he was a member of the caucus of the BC Liberal government that put in place the carbon price in British Columbia. As his leader, the former Premier Gordon Campbell said at the time, putting a price on carbon pollution is a way to reduce emissions, incent innovation, and drive an economy going forward. And he voted for that.
That's Greg Fergus, isn't it? Look at that asshole. He shut the sound off again.
The honourable member.
That partisan ass. He shut the sound off again because he doesn't want you to hear what's actually happening.
Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Sadly, empty words from these Liberals won't fill empty stomachs in Nunavut. Kyra Killabuk, an Inuit woman, shares photos of current food prices in Nunavut on her social media. A can of Campbell's potato soup is $11. Wow. A medium box of Cheerios is $17. a small package of ham is $18. After 8 years, Nunavut knows that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will this Prime Minister scrap the carbon tax, finally listen to Canadians and scrap the carbon tax on farmers, First Nations, and families?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my honourable colleague knows, 8 out of 10 Canadian families actually get more money back. If he would take the time to actually read the study that was published by the University of Calgary recently, the people who are most vulnerable get far more money back than they actually pay. Instead of presenting a plan for the economy or for the environment, the Leader of the Opposition spends his time musing about pulling us out of the Paris Agreement, joining Nicaragua and Syria. This will do nothing to address the economic future of Canada, nothing for the future of our children in fighting climate change. This climate-denying Conservative Party is not worth the risk.
Hey! The Honourable Member from King Vaughan.
Mr. Speaker, Christmas is coming and Canadians are struggling to put food on the table. Since 2016, there's been an 82% increase in the number of workers in Ontario who are using food banks. Bill C-234 would have taken carbon tax off farmers, but this desperate Prime Minister has spent the weekend calling senators, pleading them to kill the bill. He's just not worth the cost. Will this Prime Minister listen to Canadians and take the carbon tax off farmers, First Nations, and families?
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Thank you very much, and I thank the honourable member for the question. There have been accusations that she has made and other members have made in the past couple of days that indeed people in the other place were given marching orders by the Prime Minister on how to vote on that particular piece of legislation. Of course, that's not true. I think the real question is here, Mr. Speaker, and that so many Canadians are wondering, is on the issue of a Ukraine free trade agreement, who told them how to vote? That's what Canadians are wondering. Who told them? Or did they each arrive at this independently? What a shameful exercise to vote against a beacon of democracy in this world, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member. Order. The Honourable Member from North Okanagan, Shuswap.
Mr. Speaker, according to the Canada Food Price Report just released by Dell Housing, food will cost a family of 4 an additional $700 next year, totaling $16,297. After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians are being forced into the highest level of food bank use in history, proving this Prime Minister is not worth the cost as he plans to quadruple his penalizing carbon tax. Will the Prime Minister listen to Canadians and finally take the carbon tax off of farmers, First Nations, and families trying to heat their homes?
Right. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much.
How many
Mr.
times
Speaker.
have we heard that
Member
question
opposite
today?
doesn't believe in climate change, but I'm wondering if he believes in math, because a Calgary-based economist did a study on our carbon pricing program, and
Oh, a Liberal Party member?
One, a clear majority of Canadian households do receive rebates that are larger than the pollution price costs. And second, Mr. Speaker, if we got rid of the carbon tax and rebate, this would harm lower and middle income households. Mr. Speaker, when will the Conservatives admit that their risky and irresponsible, reckless approach will plunge
How can
Canadians
they
back
possibly
into
make that
harder
claim?
poverty?
How can they possibly make that claim?
The honourable member for Drummond.
How many poor people are driving cars?
To keep it down, I'm going to ask the member from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou to please.
So if the
wait his turn
very
to ask the
poorest
question.
people in
Luna.
Canada
The honourable
are
member
getting a carbon
for Drummond.
rebate, how many of them are
The
actually
announcement
in cars and
by
filling
the
their gas
CEO
tank?
of the CBC, Catherine
this is the
Tate,
problem
that
with this
600
BS
employees will
giving
be
you.
laid off is a
Oh, shut up.
disaster. It's a
No, I can see this very clearly right now. This is the BS in their numbers. So if you're making less money, so much less money that you can't afford to own or drive a car, you're getting a carbon tax rebate. This is where the Liberals are getting this funny money from. So it doesn't even affect people who are that poor. But if you're middle class and you're driving a car, you're not getting any rebate. You're not getting any money back from the government. You're paying more. So this is how they fudge the numbers, just like the medical assistance and dying numbers. They're fudging numbers there. They're fudging numbers everywhere. And they're fudging numbers with a 3.1% annual inflation rate. This is a lie, too. And this woman is an atrocity, this heritage minister. Anyway, let's go back to it.
I'd also like some answers from the CEO of CBC, and I'd like to remind the minister, that it's her role to appoint the CEO. And Ms. Tate's mandate was supposed to be all about fighting fake news, but she's doing the opposite. Cutting 600 jobs is fighting news. We need to send a clear message. 600 layoffs shouldn't have been announced. None should have been announced. None, or maybe just one. If Catherine Tate doesn't take back down on these cuts, will the minister fire her? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, our government has shown from the outset, since we took power in 2015, we've always supported the public broadcaster. We added the millions of dollars that the Conservatives had cut, despite the fact that the Bloc, the official opposition at the time, didn't manage to block those cuts. We restored funding, and despite all the crises that the media are going through and the pandemic and so on, we will continue to support the public broadcaster. And I would invite all parties here, except the Conservatives, of course, who would like to axe the CBC, I would invite them all to support our support for the CBC.
Released today, the food price report shows that a family of four is going to pay $700 more for food next year. Meanwhile, overall dollars for food spent are going down because of the cost of everything else. That means Canadians are reducing the quality or quantity or both of the food that they buy. This morning, Walmart and the CEO of Loblaws, Galen Weston, said that the carbon tax charged to the farmer, to the trucker, to the retailer and then food producer will get passed on to the consumer. After 8 years, this NDP government is not worth the cost. When will this Prime Minister repeal the carbon tax on farmers, first families, and
I'm never going to get an answer because they don't want to repeal any tax.
Mr. Speaker, being a farmer,
No.
that understands that there is a
You're not a
problem with
farmer.
climate. We do have climate change. Climate affects the weather. Destructive weather destroys farms, destroys farm crops. Quite simply, Mr. Speaker, we have a program in place. Unfortunately, the Conservative Party of Canada does not have a plan to deal with the environment. With our plan, we're able to deal with the agricultural sector and clusters and provincial governments.
We've always had natural disasters. They have nothing to do with climate change or paying for it. You infantile idiot.
From Edmonton, Manning.
The plan of no plan. Mr. Speaker, a desperate, panicking Prime Minister spent last weekend calling senators, pleading with them to kill Bill C-234 that would lower grocery pricing for Canadians. On Tuesday, those supposedly independent senators voted to gut Bill C-234, betraying farmers and keeping food prices high. After 8 years of rising prices and lower paychecks, Canadians know that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister listen to Canadians and take the carbon tax off farmers, First Nations, and families?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that that member doesn't agree with climate action, but I wonder if his children would agree with climate action. It's something that's going to impact next generations more than it affects us. But when the Conservatives show Canadians who they're advocating for, they take notice. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd pose the question back to the Leader of the Opposition. As a family of four, the Leader of the Conservatives would have received $976 in climate action incentive payments. Now, he lives in a taxpayer-funded mansion and gets driven around, so doesn't buy very much gas himself. Did he cash the check?
The Honourable Member from Fort Saskatchewan, Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Last night, under the cover of darkness, the NDP Liberal government rammed through their anti-energy, unjust transition, job-killing agenda at the Natural Resources Committee. They broke every rule of parliamentary procedure. They broke the rules and denied MPs the chance to be heard as they rammed through their anti-energy agenda. on the agenda of the committee and for the chair of the Natural Resources Committee. When will the committee consider this matter again, and how does the chair justify another gross betrayal of Canadian workers?
As members know, this question was put to the chair of the committee. The chair of the committee is, I see the vice
Get
chair
out of
standing
town,
up, the honourable member
you
from
loser. This speaker is a
Speaker, the
complete
chair in Calgary,
fraud.
Skyview
He's a
MP, should
loser.
be ashamed and will pay for his choice to betray his constituents. Bill C-50 is the top-down global just transition that will end 170,000.
And that idiot speaker shut the sound off again. That scoundrel has got to be removed. He is a absolute disaster. He has no right to be speaker. And why the Conservatives have voted for him, I have no idea. And they're probably deserving what they're getting from him because they voted this idiot in there.
I'm certain to make sure that there was no misinterpretation of her answer. To start her answer again from the top, please, but I'd ask her to be careful in the language that she uses. The honourable member from Lakeland.
The constituents of Calgary Skyview will hold the MP to account for his betrayal of their constituents, and he'll pay at the ballot box. Bill C-50 is the top-down just transition that will end oil and gas in Canada in favor of dictator and U.S. oil. The NDP Liberals know it will kill 170,000 oil and gas jobs immediately and hurt 2.7 million Canadians working in transportation, construction, agriculture, manufacturing on top of it. It will make power and fuel prices skyrocket. The NDP Liberals also know it will hurt Indigenous and visible minority Canadians the worst. It's never been more clear that Canadians cannot afford the colluding, costly cover-up coalition.
Yeah, it's time to get angry about this.
Order. The honourable member. Alors, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
Order.
Oh, shut up, you fucking excuse for the speaker.
The honourable.
You have no credibility.
The honourable member for Alfred Pellant. Mr. Speaker, our bail reform bill received royal assent this week. The legislation is the result of consultations and close cooperation among our government, all provinces and territories, and Canada's major police associations. Canadians need to have confidence in our justice system, and they need to know it will protect them from harm. My question is for the Minister of Justice and Attorney General. How will this bill improve Canadians' safety?
Thank you for that
Minister
wonderful
of Justice and Attorney
question.
General of Canada. I'd like to thank the member for Alfred Pellant for his question and for his advocacy as a representative in this House, as a father, and as a Canadian. Community safety is one of my top priorities. Bill C-48 has now received royal assent. This bail reform bill will keep violent repeat offenders off our streets. Liberals will continue to fight crime and its root causes to keep our communities safe. All provincial and territorial premiers have called for action, and police associations as well, and the municipalities. We delivered. Thank you. Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the RCMP plans to cut staffing at the Quebec border. We know that Quebec cartels, however, are more active, and people could get through the cracks. More and more people are dying of drug overdoses, and gangsters are not stupid. They do reconnaissance. They know that the borders are easy to cross. They're watching staffing levels. So could the minister instruct the RCMP to keep staffing levels up to protect Quebecers and Canadians at the border? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I've had a lot of discussions with senior members of the RCMP about strengthening our presence on the border and protecting the integrity of our borders. This is an issue that this government takes very seriously. I've also discussed this with Secretary Mayorkas, my U.S. counterpart, and I can assure the member that the number of officers at the border dealing with organized crime and border safety will not go down.
From South Shore St. Margaret's.
China's economic Cold War of taking over strategic Canadian industries has claimed another victim. After 8 years, this NDP Liberal government has turned a blind eye.
I'm going to ask all members to please only call out when they have their time to speak. The honourable member from South Shore St. Margaret's from the top, please.
This guy has got
China's
to go.
economic Cold War of taking over strategic industries in Canada has claimed another victim. After 8 years, this NDP Liberal government has turned a blind eye to this national security threat. First, China got the Prime Minister to fast-track their acquisition of Neo-Lithium and 3 other lithium companies. Now China is trying to buy Canada's only rare earth mining company, Vital Metals.
That's right.
China will take all the product to China, leaving Canadian firms without a supply.
Yeah.
Will the Prime Minister invoke the Investment Canada Act now, review this deal, and protect Canadian resources?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, our government will always stand up for Canadian workers and Canadian industries. Our government has been clear from day one. We'll always welcome foreign investment and trade that encourages economic growth, innovation.
Just read your
and
line,
employment
buddy. Read
opportunities
your
in
line,
Canada. We know
because you don't
that
stand up for
economic
anybody
security
but your
is
own
national
goddamn
security.
speech.
This bill will implement the ICA, brings forward improvements so our government can act more quickly when required. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The honourable member from Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Well, after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, Canadians are out of money and the Prime Minister is out of touch. Right. At a time when energy security is crucial, this makes life harder for Canadians and our allies. An emissions cap will destroy hundreds of thousands of jobs, billions of exports, and make life more unaffordable for Canadians. Instead of supporting powerful paychecks for our people, the Prime Minister supports dollars for dictators. So when will the Liberals' costly coalition stop supporting dirty dictator oil and let Canada export the resources that the world so desperately needs?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Mr. Speaker,
No,
I would
not
start
Wilkinson.
by noting that actually the importation of oil is half the level now that it was under Stephen Harper, so maybe he wants to check some of the facts. The cap on oil and gas production is about reducing emissions in line with what science tells us that we must, but doing so
Science
in a manner
doesn't
that
tell
will
you
enhance
anything.
economic
Science,
competitiveness of
science.
the
Is
sector,
science your God?
ensuring that we actually are decarbonizing the industry such that the barrels of oil and the natural gas that Canada will sell to the world will be the lowest carbon content of barrels of gas. I would point to successes recently of an $11.5 billion Dow facility, a net zero petrochemical facility in Alberta, and many.
The honourable member from Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadian workers built this country, and it's Canadian workers who will meet the challenges of our time.
Oh,
We believe
thank
that
you for
workers
this
don't just
softball
need a
question.
seat at the table where decisions are made, they should lead it. This is the idea behind the Sustainable Jobs Act. It's why we tabled C-58 to ban replacement workers, and it's why we launched the union-led advisory table this week. Of course, the Conservatives continue to oppose every effort to bring workers to the table because they're scared of workers. Can the Minister of Labour share how our government continues to bring workers to the table to find solutions to the challenges of our time, despite Conservative obstruction? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister for Labour.
You know what? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, yesterday we brought together Labour leaders from all across the country at our new union-led advisory table, which will advise the government on some major macroeconomic issues that have real kitchen table consequences on a lot of workers in this country, namely the energy transition, climate change, the housing crisis. We will do that at this table in the same way that we will with C-50, an 11-page bill that the opposition has found 20,000 reasons to oppose to prevent workers from having a say at the table. 20,000 reasons. What are they so afraid of? Why are they so afraid of workers, Mr. Speaker?
Here, here. The honourable member from Esquimalt Saanich Souk.
Anti-2S LGBTQI plus crimes, hate crimes in Canada are up 80%.
Oh, they're always up.
What needs right now is action to help people
85%,
keep people
yes.
safe,
I wonder
especially
they come
the
up with
most
this bullshit.
marginalized. Thousands of Canadians have already called on the government to implement the recommendations in the white paper on the status of trans and gender diverse people. But trans and gender diverse organizations need resources now.
Oh,
Will
shut
the Minister
up.
of Women and Gender Equality commit to stable funding for trans and gender diverse led
Well, of course
organizations
you will.
to make sure that they can push back against hate and violence?
Here, here.
Whatever.
The Honourable Minister for Women and Gender Equality.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for his work.
for the white paper, for all he does for the community. And the answer is yes, Mr. Speaker. We will always support trans communities. We will always support queer communities across
nice.
this
They're all
country.
in this together.
This is why we have a $100 million plan, a 2S LGBTQI action plan that puts money in the hands of those on the front lines who are helping those communities. We will always be on the side of those communities on this side of the House. Thank you, Mr.
Got
Speaker.
to get rid of these morons
The honourable
who
member
are
from
running this
Kitchener
country.
Centre.
Mr. Speaker, in the 2 years since the PM promised an oil and gas cap, today we learned what Big Oil's 2,000 meetings with this government got them. It got them a so-called cap that's going to allow oil and gas production to go up. It's going to allow carve-outs for Big Oil to buy their way into compliance using the excess profits they've gouged from Canadians. And it's going to allow for a weaker oil and gas target than even the insufficient one that this government had previously set for them. When will this government put our children's future ahead of Big Oil's greed?
Here, here. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Today was an important day for the environment and the economy. Canada became the first country to put a cap on oil and gas emissions with a trajectory to reduce net zero by 2050. But I would also say we released the emissions reduction progress report today. What that showed is we are well beyond the initial target we had when we were elected, which is 30% reduction. We will achieve the 2026, more than achieve the 2026 interim milestone, and we are on track to achieve our 40% reduction by 2030.
Although this brings to the end of question period, I'd like to wish to draw the attention of members to the presence in the gallery of the Honourable Jeremy Harper, Speaker.
Shut up. We don't talk to you. Thanks for watching today. And this was quite interesting because we've got the Speaker back in the House today. He's a totally shamed Speaker. He shouldn't be there at all. He should not be Speaker because he is a partisan Speaker, but he's still there, and we need to get rid of him because this Greg Fergus is no Speaker. And you heard the same crap about how you've got more money in your pockets because of the rebate from the carbon tax than you're putting out for the carbon tax. Is that going to stay the same? Well, of course, it's not even true now. But how about when they quadruple that carbon tax? But the thing is, as we've already seen, you're not getting that rebate unless you're in the select group of people who gets the rebate. This is what the Liberals are doing. They're lying. There's a certain amount of people are getting that rebate. Nobody in this crowd, believe me, I ask every day, nobody is getting a rebate for the carbon tax. I'm not getting it. You're not getting it. And we shouldn't be getting it because we need to axe the tax. We need to get rid of that tax because it is nonsensical. It's stupid. It's ridiculous. There's no reason for it. We have to use fossil fuels to exist until there is a viable alternative. And believe me, solar energy is not one. Wind power is not one. We need a viable alternative. If there was one presented, I would be campaigning for it. But this is a scam. This is a joke. This is a horrible maneuver to take your money. And we know that's what this is about. Thanks for watching today. I'll be back again tomorrow. My guest tomorrow on Stand on Guard is Tamara Leach, who has had to endure a horror house, a terrible time of being put in front of the public for doing nothing except peaceful protesting. And she'll be my guest tomorrow. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye.